The weather patterns have drastically shifted globally. And, I talked about this maybe a week and a half or last week. And here it is. It amplified even from last week when I was telling you that it amplified because all of the floods in Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan that are signaling a 3,600 year return of a weather system and locking in new climate system. I also talked about the African Sahel. Those are the nations from Somalia to Chad to Sudan, and we get into the central area and actually the middle of northern Africa, and we come over to Mauritania on the west coast there. That whole area is greening again.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output. But very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
And I'm going to say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this planet. If you haven't noticed, the weather, the climate system has amped up again. This is an incredible time that we're living in. The signs are all around us. Ancient cultures spoke of the changes we would expect, and here we are. As you've seen, not only in the U.S., where the climate system has completely folded in on itself, what they call bomb cyclone, something that usually is over the ocean, over land, dropping multiple feet of snow, 100-mile-per-hour winds, all the way from Texas up to the Great Lakes. That's not the only place this is happening, though. If you're taking a look at some of the weather feeds going on across the planet, you're going to find the UK also experiencing an out-of-season cyclone there, pushing 80-mile-per-hour winds. We got those extremely heavy floods, those massive, massive record-breaking all-time floods in Brazil and Sao Paulo at this time of the year. Germany's receiving 80, 90-mile-per-hour winds. The UK completely blasted. They're looking at what's happening under Scotland. The severe floods in Afghanistan, Pakistan, all-time record floods in Iran. But everywhere you look across the planet, the cyclones of historic proportions in the Indian Ocean, making it the most typhoons or cyclones ever recorded in the Indian Ocean for a season this year. Now, as was predicted with the Grand Solar Minimum intensification, the moisture patterns are going to change. So here we are. It's really beginning to show in earnest now. If you're not even half awake, you still see these effects all around. If you barely even glimpse at the news, all it is now is weather headlines or distractive headlines. I don't know if you knew Article 13, the final vote. Now, Article 13, remember that made its way through the news about the link tax in the EU, as well as what they call the copyright initiative. So if you shared links, if you even used an image from a publication as what we call fair use now to, explain news articles, that's now deemed illegal. They passed this law in the EU, but the framework and the wording is still in such a gray area, it can be interpreted literally as anything. Anything is now copyrighted on our planet, every word.
And understanding that these seismic and volcanic events are cyclical, and you'll want to check out Upheaval, why catastrophic earthquakes will soon strike the United States. Leading experts in the geophysical effects of climate change make a strong case for a link between the sun's cycles of behavior with highly destructive earthquakes. The authors explain that when the sun goes into reduced energy phase, a grand solar minimum as we're entering right now, it produces colder weather and the worst earthquakes across the historical timelines. Included are easy to understand charts and graphs showing that we face an imminent threat. Find out the status of the threat for California, Alaska, South Carolina, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and many other states and regions across our planet. And if you want to support this broadcast, click the link in the description box below to Upheaval: Why Catastrophic Earthquakes Will Soon Strike the United States, available in both paperback and Kindle versions.
When they say you can use a few words of a headline to describe the headline, they don't even tell you how many words are allowed to be used. Is it going to be one word, 2 words? But this is the most important piece of legislation I think has been passed in the last, several years. It's so restrictive on what we can do on the internet. Yet at the same time, to deflect that so it didn't make the greater news, why didn't Article 13 make it through so much of the news headlines? This is a game changer and a showstopper and an end to much of what we're doing on the internet in terms of what you can share about weather events, climate events, political events, anything, memes, everything's gone out of Europe now. So I wanted to really dig into that because this affects your life the most. As I've said from the inception of the channel, as we move forward, they're going to think of creative and unique ways to try to suppress voices spreading this type of information and about the weather changes, about the climate change, about the Grand Solar Minimum, cycles in the past, recent cycles of 400 years, longer duration cycles, 3,600, 7,200 years. They're going to put a pinch on it to try to, restrict the amount of information flow between citizens, because as your food prices rise, you're going to know where the shortages are. You're going to start to see it. You're going to talk about it. You're going to panic about it. They want to stop that. I didn't know exactly how they would do it to encompass the entire web to be able to just shut off all discussion. But here they've done it pretty much with the EU directive. Article 13, because now, just like as you saw with the copyright protection, EU passed the law, but every single other country and website has adopted the system. Because now when you surf the web, every site you go to, it says, oh, click our acceptance on terms and policies condition because we accept cookies, for a better user experience. That never used to be on any website until the EU passed that policy and that privacy directive. Everybody in the world adopted it, the standard status quo, the least common denominator. Everybody followed that. Now what are they going to do with Article 13? There's 2 choices. Either all the tech companies turn off Europe completely, like they just turn it off. There's no more YouTube or Twitter, Facebook, anything social media at all, Vine, Snapchat, and a list does go on. Periscope, not available. Anything that's going to be shown in Europe has a possibility of having content from another source in it. And now they're holding the platforms responsible, not the individuals. This was the greatest change and the greatest takeaway. You, the individual, are no longer responsible for what you post across social media. Now the company that's hosting it is responsible. So what they're trying to say is, out of the millions of hours of uploaded content that we get per week across this planet, the individual platforms themselves are going to have to sift through it all with this AI technology, these AI bots or whatever it might be, comb through it and look for copyrighted material. And if it is, then turn off the video. If even one slide, one image, one audio clip, one music clip gets through, the platform's responsible. So how do you think that's going to really work? Do you think YouTube's going to leave Europe on, or do you think they're going to just start cutting everything left, right, and center? This is the most important news story of the last decade, because I understand there's a lot going on the planet in terms of treaties and governments, etc., but this affects everybody's life personally. It affects the way we can share information from this point forward. It is the most all-encompassing, draconian, 1984, New World censorship system that's ever been in place, except for China. I'm going to put it with number 2 right up there with censorship out of China and North Korea. But this will be a fighting for those positions somewhere in that top 3. For those of my listeners in Mozambique, I know I have 2 down there. Thank you for joining me and spending your time from Africa today. And you have to realize that that part of Africa, Southern Africa, with South Africa and Zimbabwe and Mozambique right there, Madagascar just offshore, that whole area on that east part of Southern Africa tip has been in a drought for such a long time. Interestingly, on the west side of Africa, at the southern Cape tip, whatever you like to call it, down there, all the way up to the Kalahari Desert, has been receiving massive amounts of rain. Usually that's the desert side. But it is greening again as we speak. The Cape Town water shortages were partially skilled, engineered, induced, as well as what nature threw at it, but it looks like the drought's alleviated itself. So these massive downpours going to wipe out whatever crops were planted down there. It's not going to stick in the soil. It's going to be a massive runoff event. So with the baked hard ground that's concrete style. I also had a chance to sit down with one of my buddies the other night and talk about South Africa. He is South African, and he had to flee the country. I've known him for several years, so we sat down to chat, and he was telling me, we went into the politics a little bit, but I'm not going to go into that here. What we talked about was food. And his assessment, this is straight from the horse's mouth, the agricultural production in South Africa is failing considerably at the moment. White farmers are terrified to be where they are, so they're not actually in production as they would be. They're not gearing up for the planting season. The amount of machinery that was damaged due to vandalism and just farms being overrun and people fleeing in the middle of the night for their lives like we saw up in Zimbabwe. The infrastructure for anything agricultural that was controlled in sort of a fashion by either companies that then on-paid and had supervisors and managers that were not of pure African descent, those farms are lying idle. Food prices are starting to rise in South Africa, plus the just-in-time delivery, the actual grid system itself is failing. They're not able to keep it up. I don't think the leadership down in South Africa took into consideration how valuable food is in the whole mechanism of a country's economy flowing properly. Now they have to import, and these imports are twice, 3 times as expensive as what the homegrown, if you will, base commodity crops were. So, South Africa is not such a huge major producer in terms of world exports, but in terms of African exports, it's the #1 exporter. So you got to realize that regionally, South Africa supplied an enormous amount of other African nations. Now this in itself is now going bye-bye. Literally, when I say that, my friend was talking absurd numbers of something down 90% or more. And I said, that's really impossible. Isn't there state-run organizations and government institutions that have been running farms for generations? Don't they have like a farm co-op where they have, government in there running the farms, farm training programs, etc.? It's like, nope, that all got broken down. They didn't find the value in teaching people how to grow food at the industrial level. So all the farmers that were there were the ones that were mainly running and training the others on the farms. But since they're fleeing and in hiding, and then we want to stay in the Southern Hemisphere as well with Tasmania, cold weather emergencies and frost warnings and advisories, etc. in Tasmania at this time of the year. It's just coming out from summer going into fall, but at the late summer, you know how it is in the Northern Hemisphere in August, it's usually hotter. It's at the end of the season. They have the most ambient heat effect at that point. But here it is, cold weather advisory. So you start to see this around the planet. It's not just an individual spot. It's everywhere globally where this is happening. But everywhere you look, a major food producer is having trouble with the climate being completely out of season, flipping early, turning in late. Southern Hemisphere is something that we all need to pay attention to. And, I talked about this maybe a week and a half or last week, and here it is. It amplified even from last week when I was telling you that it amplified because all of the floods in Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan that are signaling a 3,600-year return of a weather system and locking in new climate system. I also talked about the African Sahel. Those are the nations from Somalia to Chad to Sudan, and we get into the central area and actually the middle of northern Africa, and we come over to Mauritania on the west coast there. That whole area is greening again. And the last time that area had massive rainfalls enough for it to turn into grasslands was 7,200 years ago. Along with the Middle East, massive rainfalls, inland seas, areas turning into just the most verdant fields of flowers and desert blooms that you've ever seen. With the massive locust swarms too, because now they have an abundant food supply. These changes that we're talking about that keep running through the news are not a 400-year cycle any longer. It is definitely way beyond that. We're looking something in the 3,600-year event time period. So each individual week we're marching forward now, it's getting larger and larger and larger, and it's unbelievable how fast it's changing. Truly, the people I keep in contact with are shocked at how quickly it's shifting. I mean, not just shocked, but shocked to the point where their jaw's dropping open. Everybody that's in this Grand Solar Minimum community that had their own predictions of how fast this thing was going to unfurl, which years there would be amplifications, etc. And these words keep running through the media: historic, unprecedented, never seen before. This is the new weather that we're going to expect. Like every season is going to be like this, but it's going to get worse from now on. Like what you're seeing right now with this bomb cyclone wasn't predicted until 2021 for most people. So at the bare minimum, everything's running 2 years ahead of the amplification that we were all thinking, at least in this first wave of the timeline of 2 waves. But see, that would be expected if we're going into a far heavier cycle, more powerful cycle than just a 400-year regular grand solar minimum. That would be expected, that it would amplify faster. The changes would be more pronounced more quickly.
TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
Now, for you out there, I'm just going to say it again and again. You're going to have to grow some of your own food. You truly are. Open pollinated seeds, that's exactly what we need. Grown in the local region where you are going to be. In the U.S., like you don't want to really buy seeds from Asia and try to plant them in the U.S. It just doesn't work like that. And these seeds need to produce multiple generations. And you can support the broadcast to keep this type of information coming to you. Things that have protein, vitamin C, high nutrient density. These are things that we all need because the nutrient content in the food they were eating in the 1600s was one of the main reasons that the diseases swept through so quickly. In the late Antique Little Ice Age, 535 AD, as well as 14th century, they both had the Black Death come around. Now, I think it was in part because immune systems were so depleted. The more unhealthy food people eat, the more their immune systems are going to get depleted. And you have to realize the world we're in already, surrounded by toxins, inundated by toxins, pumped full of toxins in our daily lives. And now we're going to get reduced nutrient intake. Oh, the bodies we have now are nothing like the fit bodies they had in the 1600s, 1300s, 500 AD. You got to realize they were eating incredibly healthy foods. Their base diet was an organic diet, basically. So how in tune were they with nature? How good was their diet compared to ours? How healthy were their natural immune systems because they were eating natural foods every day? Yet they got wiped out because their immune systems were depleted and they didn't have enough food to eat or grow regionally, locally. So these are things you're going to need to think about. And if I can impart to you one thing, you're going to have to know how to grow food. And I'll tell you my own experience. I have just installed a 8-tube vertical grow tower, and it was working great in the first couple days, but then we had this super massive rainstorm come, so I unplugged it to try not to short it out. I wanted to make sure that where it's sitting on the balcony and I didn't have the waterproof extension cord, I had a regular extension cord. So I thought, I'm going to unplug this thing for a few hours while the storm passes. When I plugged it back in, the timer for when it waters for 15 minutes and turns off for 2 hours, waters for 15 minutes, turns off for 2 hours. When that became unplugged, when I plugged it back in, the timer reset, which I thought it reset back to 0 to start again. It didn't. But I noticed that. And then I had a little trouble trying to get the timer, so I was like, you know what, I will just do it by hand because the electrical cord there, I'll just turn it on and off with the light switch. So I thought, all right, I'll turn it on every couple hours and then I'll turn it off. But as I was doing that, I didn't realize that it was connected to the pump that didn't start the turnover on the timer. So for 2 whole days, even though I thought I was watering the plants and getting them water like on the semi-regular schedule until I could get a new timer figured out, those plants didn't get any water for 2 straight days, even though I thought they did. See, that was a technological breakdown right there. So if you're going to rely on that and we were waiting for that food to stay alive, we'd be 2 or 3 days behind. And now the plants were more stressed because they didn't have the water. So it's going to take them a little bit longer to recover. So it's these little things to learn while you're moving through the process. I am so meticulous and careful every time I go out there now. You have no idea how much that changed my perception of keeping an eye on your food and mechanized systems. Every single 2 hours, when I think that thing's going to turn on, I go out and check to make sure that the water had run through versus just going, oh, I'll rely on technology to do it. You're going to have to learn how to grow food, and you're going to have to protect it or bring it indoor, because what we're seeing right now with these weather systems, these new rains, the new winds, everywhere you look, there's a change going on the planet in the jet streams and just the way winds are flowing across the planet and how the cloud cells are then in turn depositing moisture. These winds are going to get really super ferocious as we move forward because the jet streams are battling to find new places in the atmosphere because of the weakening sun. The low solar activity allows this to happen on these 400-year cycles. Knowing that as a base, this is going to continue to amplify. Great. That is a check-the-box piece of information. You could talk to your blue in the face about all the effects around the world you're seeing. You could talk to your purple in the face because there's that much information. But there's at a point where you're kind of like, all right, I understand it. Now what's the solution? Well, the solution is being creative with ways to protect what you're growing, because you got to realize you can't grow everything inside at the moment without a lot of tech and a lot of mechanized machinery. You need pumps that are automated. You need humidity control that's automated. You need airflow that's automated. You need everything that's automated in the system, including the nutrient mix itself that's flowing through the trays or the pipes or the tubes, whatever you have. Now, a lot of people are trying to do a hybrid where they're using sides of their homes and they're trying to bring out the food production and put everything on the side of the house and like, hey, we can use this in this part of the garden. Great. But when these new storms come in, if you've gone to the effort to grow partial garden and plant everything that will be your food source, you're going to need to protect it. This is the main thing I found out too with that massive rainstorm that blew through where I turned off the vertical grow towers. The rain was so heavy and all the pots that we had planted out there, the water came in and actually dug the dirt out from the splashing raindrops and just totally destroyed everything we had out there. We had to replant almost everything after this storm. Ferocious. It was like 4 inches of rain, and you're going to have to be creative to protect your food. Now, I could understand Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana. I could understand why National Guard would be out there because people living in warmer climates in the United States, Southeast U.S., they don't normally get blizzards. So if you saw a National Guard out there rescuing people in southern Alabama that were stuck in a blizzard, you would go, oh, that makes sense. They don't know how to drive in the snow, so they weren't used to the snow accumulations or how slippery the road conditions were. I could see why that happened. But when you have the National Guard rescuing 3,000 stranded motorists and people trapped in Colorado, it takes it to a whole new level. Really does, truly does. That's an area that's well known for those types of wet, snowy, icy conditions. Always, every winter, all the time, every single winter, it's like that. They're so used to it, it's sleepwalk driving through the snow. This weather anomaly is such an outlier. I hope it wakes more people up. This is such this could be possibly the largest weather event across the United States, except for that super freeze that dropped temperatures to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit back in February. Blizzard/inland cyclone. The cloud loops and the water vapor, and look at GOES 16 or go look at GOES maps just take a look, anything on GOES, GOES satellite. I'll put it in the best perspective I can here, and I hope this makes sense. The Super Freeze 1.0, the very first one that blanketed the US and Canada with all-time coldest temperatures ever recorded in all-time history back to at least the last 200 years in the United States, occurred this February. followed by the most snow ever recorded, ever, in locations across the United States. And I'm not talking about a single year. I'm talking about as far as the records go back. And now the rain out west, again, we got Arizona, most rainfall ever recorded, not for a single day, not for a single year, ever. We got snowpack on the Sierra Nevada mountains that is so deep now they need to use LiDAR to take a look at the snow depth. The measuring equipment is inadequate for them to even measure how deep the snow is up in the Sierra Nevadas this year. It was like that the year before, record setting. And now it's even more record setting, and they're going to look at about a 30 to 40% increase over last year's record snow total, 2017-18. Everywhere you look, the extremes are becoming more extreme. You're going to have to protect what you plant. Like right now, we're trying to work with some plastic sheeting to have a roll-up canvas type of a thing where when storms come in, we're able to pull plastic sheeting over at least a part of what we have planted out there in these pots. Got to realize I'm on the 14th floor in the middle of a city with a 200 square foot balcony, and I'm trying to do an urban garden. It doesn't matter if it's an urban garden or if it's an outdoor garden or if it's wedged up against your home or if it's straight out in the back of the backyard at the back corner of the fence. You're going to need to protect it. So think about this as a solution-based type of an idea. Most people don't know how to protect the plants. If you're able to wire that skill out and be able to build or DIY a plant protecting mechanism, right there you go. You have a new niche that you can fulfill. Because as we move forward, people are going to be looking for that, and a lot of people will not have the skill to DIY or actually install something that's going to protect what they grew.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.